Carl Jung believed that much of who we present to the world is not who we truly are, but who we've learned to be, a psychological armor forged in the fires of survival. From early childhood, we begin to adapt, sensing what parts of ourselves are acceptable and which ones must be exiled. This adaptation is not conscious, it is visceral. It is a response to subtle messages, emotional reactions, and sometimes even silence. Imagine a child who is naturally loud, expressive, and emotional, but who grows up in a household where emotional expression is punished or ridiculed. That child doesn't just learn to be quiet. They start to believe that their true emotional self is wrong, so they suppress it. They wear a mask, and over time they forget they are even wearing it. This mask, or persona, as Jung called it, serves a vital function in society. It allows us to fit in, to be accepted, to survive. But when the persona becomes a prison, when we forget the difference between the face we show and the self we hide, we begin to feel lost, anxious, or even depressed, without knowing why. You see, Jung didn't condemn the persona. He understood it as necessary. But he warned that if we identify too strongly with it, we lose access to our essence. We become actors in a play we didn't write, speaking lines we never agreed to. This isn't just about trauma in the traditional sense. It's about subtle emotional conditioning, cultural expectations, gender roles, religion, school systems. Every time a part of your true self was dismissed or shamed, you learned to disown it. But that disowned part didn't disappear. It went underground, into the unconscious, into what Jung called the shadow. And here lies the paradox. The very parts of yourself you had to hide in order to be loved are the parts that will set you free. Do you remember a moment when you felt like you had to hide who you truly were? Share your experience in the comments. Someone out there might need to hear they're not alone. Carl Jung introduced the concept of the shadow to describe the parts of ourselves we reject, suppress, or deny, not because they are inherently evil or dangerous, but because we were taught they were unacceptable. The shadow begins to form the moment we realize that being our full self risks rejection, punishment, or abandonment. Children are wired to seek love and belonging. When certain behaviors or emotions threaten that connection, maybe anger, sensitivity, ambition, curiosity, or even joy, the child buries them. But burying doesn't destroy. These disowned parts live on, just below the surface, shaping our inner world in powerful ways. Jung explained that the shadow is not simply our dark side. It's a container for anything we've hidden to survive, including strengths, desires, gifts, and truths. For example, a child who is shamed for being too assertive might suppress their natural leadership. Someone told they were too sensitive might lose touch with their empathy and intuition. And here's the tragic irony. We often spend our adult lives searching for wholeness, for meaning, for freedom, not realizing that the very qualities we need have been buried inside us all along. But the shadow doesn't stay silent. It leaks. It appears in our triggers, our projections, our self-sabotage. It shows up in our relationships, in our irrational reactions, in the way we sabotage our own happiness. The shadow is not the enemy, it's a messenger. And if we listen closely, it will lead us back to the parts of ourselves we were forced to abandon. Jung warned that if we do not become conscious of the shadow, we will project it onto others. We'll judge them for what we deny in ourselves. We'll fear in others what we secretly fear about who we are. This is how prejudice, resentment, envy, and even hatred are born, not just culturally, but personally. So the question is, what have you hidden from the world in order to survive? And more importantly, what would it mean to reclaim it? Which part of yourself have you always felt you had to keep hidden? And what do you think would happen if you brought it to light? Let's talk about it below. To survive and be accepted in the world, we all construct what Jung called the persona, a kind of social mask, an identity we craft to meet the expectations of our environment. It's the version of ourselves we show to the world: polite, agreeable, productive, composed, and often incomplete. Jung was clear. The persona isn't fake. It's just partial. It's real, but it's not the whole truth. Think of it like a costume in a play. It helps you function, navigate society, and avoid rejection. The problem isn't the mask. The problem is when you forget it's a mask. Most of us were never taught to differentiate between who we truly are and who we were trained to be. We grew up learning that approval equals safety. So we became adaptable, reading the room, softening our emotions, smiling when we were hurting, being strong when we were falling apart. Over time, these strategies become identity. You're not just pretending anymore. You believe you are the calm one, the achiever, the helper, the caretaker, the responsible one, the strong one. And yet, beneath that role, you may carry rage, sadness, fear, desire, all the things that didn't fit the mask but never actually left you. Jung believed that true growth begins when we start peeling back the persona, not to destroy it, but to see what lies underneath. Because behind every mask is a person longing to be seen without conditions. The danger of over-identifying with the persona is this. It creates an inner split. You become alienated from your true feelings, your deepest needs, your inner voice. You might succeed in the eyes of the world, but feel chronically empty or unseen. You might be surrounded by people but feel utterly alone because they don't really know you. They only know the role you've been playing. Healing begins when you stop performing for love and start showing up as you are. But that requires confronting a terrifying question: will they still accept me if I stop pretending? Have you ever realized you were playing a role, even without meaning to? What was that mask, and what was hiding behind it? Drop your reflection below. Living behind a mask may keep you safe, but it also keeps you distant from yourself and from others. Jung taught that when we hide essential parts of who we are, we don't just lose authenticity, we lose vitality. We begin to feel numb, disconnected, fragmented. You may find yourself asking, why don't I feel truly alive? Why do I feel unseen, even when I'm surrounded by people? Why does nothing feel quite real anymore? These are the symptoms of a self in exile. The more energy we spend maintaining a persona, the less energy we have left for joy, spontaneity, creativity, and intimacy. We become performers in our own lives, doing what's expected, saying what's acceptable, smiling when we're dying inside. And we convince ourselves this is what adulthood is. Numbness disguised as maturity. Jung saw this in his patients long before modern psychology gave it language. People who seemed put together on the outside, but who were secretly anxious, depressed, angry, or hollow. People who had accomplished everything: career, family, success, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. What was missing wasn't out there. It was in them, the disowned self, the forgotten inner child, the wildness that had been tamed for too long. What was missing was wholeness. You see, the human soul doesn't just want to be good, it wants to be whole. That includes light and dark, strength and softness, joy and sorrow. But we were taught to be one-dimensional, to be likable, productive, agreeable, so we amputated parts of ourselves to be loved. That love, however, came with a price: disconnection from our essence. Reconnecting with the self isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And that process, Jung called it individuation, is the path back to aliveness. Can you relate to this sense of disconnection? What do you think it's costing you to keep certain parts of yourself hidden? Write it below. The first step to reclaiming yourself is naming what you've lost. At the heart of Jung's work is a powerful and deeply spiritual process he called individuation. It is not about becoming perfect, or enlightened, or even happy in the conventional sense. Individuation is the process of becoming whole, integrating all the parts of yourself, even the ones you've hidden, feared, or rejected. To individuate is to walk back through the shadows of your past, confront your masks, and retrieve the parts of yourself that were left behind. It's not a self-improvement journey, it's a homecoming. Jung believed that every person has a unique blueprint, a self that is deeper than the ego or the persona. But in order to reach it, you must go through the uncomfortable and often painful process of reuniting with what you've disowned. That includes your anger, your grief, your sexual energy, your ambition, your intuition, your wildness, everything you buried to fit in, to be good, to be accepted. Most people avoid this journey. Why? Because it requires them to break their own illusion. It requires saying, I am not who I thought I was. I am much more, and much messier. And that's terrifying, but it's also liberating. When you begin to integrate your shadow, the mask starts to dissolve. You start showing up more honestly, not just with others, but with yourself. You stop betraying your needs for approval. You stop dimming your light to make others comfortable. You stop settling for a life that looks good but feels wrong. This is not an overnight transformation. It is a lifelong path. It involves self-reflection, inner work, brutal honesty, and compassion. It involves owning your contradictions, because you are both kind and angry, brave and scared, wise and wounded. Jung called this process sacred because in peeling back the layers of your conditioning, you don't just find your truth, you reconnect with your soul. If you could reclaim just one part of yourself that you've lost along the way, one trait, one feeling, one truth, what would it be? Write it in the comments. Reclaiming begins with remembering. Jung understood something long before trauma became a mainstream topic, that the psyche adapts not just to survive physically, but emotionally. And in this adaptation, we often become someone else. You weren't born afraid to speak. You weren't born ashamed of your feelings. You weren't born believing you were too much, too sensitive, too needy, or not enough. Those beliefs were given to you through words, silence, punishment, neglect, or inconsistency. And in response, you shifted. You adapted. You built a version of yourself that could cope. But here's the key. That version was never your essence. It was a strategy. Some people coped by becoming perfectionists, always doing more, achieving more, never resting. Others became caretakers, always meeting the needs of others while ignoring their own. Some shut down completely, retreating into numbness and isolation. These are all expressions of the same root. I had to become someone else to be safe. Jung saw the tragedy in this, because the longer we stay in these adaptive roles, the more distant we become from our inner truth. We mistake survival strategies for personality. We say, I've just always been this way, not realizing no. This is who I had to become to make it through. That's why inner work isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about seeing clearly what is truly you and what is an inherited defense. What are your authentic preferences, and what are learned habits designed to avoid pain? This kind of awareness is uncomfortable. It shakes the foundation, but it also opens the door to freedom. You no longer have to live out the scripts you were handed. You can rewrite the story not by denying what happened to you, but by finally telling the truth about it. This is the real work of individuation, peeling away the roles you were forced to play so you can remember the self you were born with. Have you ever realized that something you thought was part of your personality was actually a defense mechanism? Share what you've discovered. It might resonate deeply with someone else here. One of the most painful and invisible consequences of hiding your true self is the creation of an inner split. This is what Jung saw as a core wound of the modern psyche, the conflict between the authentic self and the adapted self. You may feel it as a quiet war inside. A part of you wants to rest, but another part screams, keep going or you'll be worthless. A part of you longs to speak up, while another whispers, stay small, it's safer that way. A part of you dreams of freedom, but a stronger part warns, don't risk losing everything. This tug of war creates exhaustion, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Jung knew that when we are divided within, no external success or relationship can bring peace. Because the real battle isn't out there, it's inside. We often think healing is about becoming better. Jung would disagree. Healing, to him, was about becoming real. And that means making peace with the parts of yourself that have been exiled for years. That means letting the authentic self, the self that existed before fear and shame, come forward again. But this doesn't happen by force. It happens through awareness, curiosity, and compassion. Jung emphasized the power of dialogue with the unconscious. When we begin to observe our inner conflicts without judgment, we create space for integration. The voice that's terrified doesn't need to be silenced, it needs to be heard. The part of you that lashes out doesn't need punishment, it needs understanding. Every reaction, every pattern, every emotion you carry has a reason. It's trying to protect you. But those protections, formed in childhood, may now be limiting you in adulthood. Integration is the art of saying, I see all of me, and I choose to stop hiding from myself. Only then can the inner split begin to mend. Do you feel like there are two versions of you, the one the world sees, and the one you hide? What would it take to start closing that gap? Let's explore it in the comments. Jung understood that we don't just hide parts of ourselves, we betray them, and that betrayal often feels necessary. It begins when we tell ourselves, if I'm honest, they'll leave, or, if I say what I really feel, I'll be punished, so we comply. We people please. We nod when we want to scream. We stay silent to keep the peace. We become what others want us to be at the cost of who we really are, and in doing so, we commit a slow, invisible form of self-abandonment. At first, it seems harmless. We adapt to survive a glance from a parent, a harsh word from a teacher, a rejection from a friend, a rule from society. We learn, don't rock the boat, don't be too emotional, don't want too much. But over time, this adaptation becomes identity. And eventually, we look in the mirror and no longer recognize ourselves. We wonder why we feel anxious, resentful, empty, or exhausted, not realizing we've built a life based on who we thought we had to be, not who we truly are. Jung would say, this is the crisis that calls you home. It's not selfish to stop betraying yourself. It's sacred, because when you honor your truth, even in small ways, you send a message to your psyche. You matter. Your needs matter. Your voice matters. Healing this betrayal doesn't mean blowing up your life. It begins in quiet, honest acts, saying no when everything in you wants to say yes, just to avoid discomfort. Admitting what you actually feel, even if you don't fully understand it yet. Giving space to your anger, your joy, your grief, without shame. Every time you choose truth over approval, you reclaim a piece of your soul. And in doing so, you begin to create a life that doesn't just look good to others, it feels real to you. Have you ever said yes when everything in you was screaming no? What did it cost you, and what did it teach you? Let's talk in the comments. Someone might need to hear they're not alone. One of Carl Jung's most transformative insights was this. What you repress in yourself, you project onto others. This psychological phenomenon, known as projection, happens when you unconsciously disown a trait or emotion within yourself and then begin to see it exaggerated in the people around you. For example, if you've repressed your own anger, you might see others as aggressive or difficult, even when they're simply being assertive. If you've buried your creativity, you may admire or resent people who express theirs freely. If you deny your desire for freedom, you may criticize others for being reckless or irresponsible. Projection is not a flaw, it's a mirror. It reveals what you haven't yet made peace with inside yourself. Jung believed that projections are one of the greatest obstacles to self-awareness. Why? Because they blind us to what's truly ours. We think we're describing someone else, but we're actually describing the parts of ourselves we don't want to face. And this goes beyond negative traits. We also project our unlived potential, our power, beauty, brilliance onto others. We say, they're so confident. so radiant, so talented, not realizing those qualities live in you, too. You just haven't claimed them yet. That's why Jung called the process of withdrawing projections a sacred task. It's not easy. It requires humility. You have to ask, what is this person triggering in me? What does this irritation, admiration, or envy say about me? Every projection is an invitation to reintegrate what you've exiled. This doesn't mean others don't have flaws or strengths. But when your emotional response to them is disproportionate, intense anger, admiration, jealousy, disgust, there's likely a deeper story playing out inside you. By owning your projections, you don't just understand others more clearly, you begin to see yourself with radical honesty, and that clarity is the foundation of true freedom. Think of someone who triggers a strong emotional reaction in you, good or bad. What do you think that reaction might reveal about you? Share your insight. It might awaken someone else's at a certain point in life, sometimes quietly, sometimes through crisis. The hidden self begins to stir. The part of you that was silenced, forgotten, or buried rises and whispers, there must be more than this. This is the beginning of awakening. Jung saw this moment not as a breakdown, but as a breakthrough. It often comes with discomfort, anxiety, restlessness, a sense that the life you've built no longer fits, even if it should. You may look around and wonder, why do I feel empty when I have everything I thought I wanted? That emptiness isn't a flaw. It's a signal, a call from the self, the deeper center of your psyche, asking you to remember what's real. And here's what Jung knew. The real you never left. It's been waiting, underneath the roles, the expectations, the strategies. It's been sending signals in your dreams, your symptoms, your frustrations, all urging you to come home. When this awakening begins, you may question your career, relationships, values, and goals. Feel less tolerant of inauthenticity in yourself and others. Long for meaning, depth, and inner peace. Feel grief for all the years you lived, disconnected from your truth. This grief is sacred. It means you're reconnecting with your soul, but it can be terrifying. Because to answer the call of the self, you must leave behind the certainty of your false identity. You must risk not being liked, not being understood. You must begin to live from within, not from expectation. This is what Jung meant by individuation. The journey of becoming who you truly are, not who the world told you to be. It's not easy. It demands courage, patience, and often solitude. But it is the only path that leads to real peace. The kind that isn't dependent on circumstances or approval. You are not broken for feeling out of place. You are awakening. Have you felt this inner shift, the sense that the old version of you no longer fits? What has been the hardest part of that process? Let's hold space for that truth in the comments. One of the greatest barriers to living authentically is the fear of being truly seen. When you have spent years hiding your real self to survive, vulnerability can feel terrifying. Exposing the parts of you that don't fit the mask risks rejection, judgment, or abandonment. Jung understood that vulnerability is not weakness, it is strength. It takes courage to step into the light with all your imperfections and contradictions. It takes bravery to say, this is me, not perfect, not polished, but real. In embracing vulnerability, you allow others to see the whole you. And paradoxically, this deepens connection and belonging because true relationships are built on authenticity, not pretense. But the journey toward vulnerability often requires first making peace with yourself. You must accept your shadow, your mistakes, your pain, and your desires. Only when you are gentle with your own hidden parts can you trust others enough to reveal them. Jung believed that this process leads to what he called wholeness, not perfection, but the integration of all parts of yourself into a coherent and loving whole. Remember, the masks you've worn were protective, but now, they no longer serve your growth. The invitation is to shed them, bit by bit, and show up as you really are, because the person who is brave enough to be vulnerable is the person who is truly free. What would it take for you to show one hidden part of yourself to someone you trust? Share your thoughts. Sometimes naming the fear is the first step to breaking it. After years of hiding, adapting, and surviving, the ultimate journey is reclaiming who you truly are. Jung taught that this is not just psychological work. It is a spiritual awakening. Reclaiming yourself means embracing all the parts you once hid, denied, or feared. It means loving the messy, imperfect, brilliant being beneath the mask. This process can feel like peeling back layers of armor, shedding old identities, and rediscovering your soul's voice. It requires patience, courage, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. But the reward is immense. A life lived from truth, connection, and deep inner peace. You are not who you pretended to be. You are who you had to hide to survive, and now, you have the power to bring that hidden self into the light. This is your invitation to live authentically, to honor your full story, and to step boldly into the freedom of being you. If you've watched until here, drop a word or emoji in the comments to let me know you made it. Your journey toward authenticity matters. Keep going, and don't forget to click on the next video that's about to appear. There's so much more waiting for you.